Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a fog-soaked frontier where the Roman world collides with damp forests, restless tribes and more midges than any soldier could reasonably swat. Imagine the crackle of a campfire struggling against drizzle cloaks, pulled tight, and the faint outline of a marching column fading into mist. This is the story of the legion that went in and never came out. And yes, before you ask, you probably would not survive the journey. Too much rain, too little wine. And let's not even mention the local cuisine, which made hardtack look gourmet. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you are at it, post your location and local time below. It is always fun to see how far across the globe we travel together. Now find yourself a cozy seat or a soft bed. Let your mind begin to unwind, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The legion sets out from its fort near the northern reaches of Roman Britannia, boots sinking slightly into the sodden earth. The year is uncertain, scholars still argue whether it was the late 1st or early 2nd century, but the sense of danger is unmistakable. Each soldier shoulders nearly 25 kilograms, about 55 pounds of gear shield, gladius rations, even a small spade. It is the Roman version of a camping trip, except with more chance of being ambushed and fewer marshmallows. Cloaks flap in the damp wind, and the rhythmic beat of iron-shod sandals gives the march a grim steadiness. Fog hangs heavy over the landscape, swallowing visibility. For a legion trained to fight in close formation, the loss of sight feels disorienting, almost supernatural. The veterans mutter about omens, recalling the time when commanders sacrificed chickens before battle, to see if they pecked eagerly or sulked in silence. One joker whispers that the birds probably refused to come out in this weather either. Still, the discipline of Rome holds. Centurions bark orders, ranks straighten. The army presses forward into forests that seem to close in with every mile or every 1.5 kilometers, depending on whether you count Roman paces or modern strides. The mainstream fact is simple. Rome was a master of logistics. Roads stretched across the empire, aqueducts carried water for cities, and armies usually moved with clockwork precision. Yet here on the fringe of Britannia, that certainty dissolves. Instead of paved highways, the legion trudges along muddy tracks cut by carts and swollen with rain. The soldiers curse the cold, remembering warmer garrisons on the Rhine or in Gaul. Some even joke that exile to Egypt with its blazing 40 degrees Celsius, about 104 degrees Fahrenheit, would be preferable to this eternal damp. Among the ranks, fringe beliefs thrive. Soldiers whisper that spirits haunt the marshes. Some tell of druids who can summon mists thick enough to blind an army, or of tribes who fight not with steel, but with illusions. One man insists he saw a ghostly figure the night before, pale and silent, watching from the tree line. Was it a rebel scout, or just his imagination fed by too much sour wine? Historians still argue whether such superstitions weakened morale, or simply gave soldiers something to grumble about besides the weather. As the march drags on, campfires become the highlight of each evening. Flames sputter in the damp, but they offer light warmth and the chance to roast whatever unlucky rabbit the scouts manage to snare. Bread hardens quickly in Britannia's moisture, so men improvise by soaking it in whatever broth or beer they can manage. One quirky tidbit: Roman soldiers sometimes used fermented fish sauce, garum, even here at the edge of the world. The smell must have mixed charmingly with wet socks and smoke. Night settles uneasily. Owls call from the trees, and the mist grows thicker as if it is alive, shifting to obscure landmarks. The men huddle under cloaks, some scratching quick messages on wax tablets, though few of those letters will ever make it back to Rome. The sense of distance is immense. They are thousands of kilometers, roughly 2,000 miles, from the imperial heart. Out here, the empire feels less like an eternal force, and more like a rumour told by men clinging to discipline. The centurions keep up appearances, striding along with vine staffs at the ready. Punishments for lagging remain harsh. A soldier who snores too loudly is cuffed. Another who misplaces a javelin earns a tongue lashing. Yet beneath the surface, unease ripples. The men know that tribes watch them from the shadows. They know that the governor demands results, not excuses. And they know that fog can hide anything and ambush a betrayal, or perhaps nothing at all, which somehow feels worse. By the time dawn breaks again, the legion presses deeper into terrain that seems almost designed to swallow armies. Trees grow thick, rivers twist unpredictably, and mists roll down from the hills like waves from another world. Horses snort nervously, and the standard-bearer grips the eagle tighter, its bronze gleam dulled by damp air. It is both symbol and target. As long as the eagle stands, the legion endures. If it falls, morale collapses. Everyone knows this. Everyone fears it. And so they march. Mile after mile, kilometre after kilometre, they vanish into the whiteness. Villagers along the way watch silently, some crossing themselves in local gestures, others sneaking away before the Romans arrive. No record survives of what exactly these people thought, only that when later reports tried to trace the legion's movements, the trail dissolved. Like footprints washed by rain, the details slipped away. At this point, the listener is left with the image of an entire Roman army swallowed by weather, trudging into an unknown that even Rome could not catalogue. The irony is delicious. The empire that mapped the world, that measured roads with milestones, that demanded order, could not prevent its soldiers from fading into fog. And so as we follow them step by step, you might feel the damp seep into your cloak too, and wonder whether the next bend in the path leads to battle or to silence everlasting. The soldiers wake to another dawn that is more grey than gold, their cloaks still damp from the mist that seems to seep into everything. A few men groan as they heave themselves upright, stretching back stiff from sleeping on sodden ground. The camp stirs slowly like a bear reluctant to leave its cave. Fires are coaxed back to life with damp twigs producing more smoke than warmth, and the smell clings to everything armour, hair, even bread. This is life on the edge of the empire, not marble columns or grand speeches, but mud smoke and the ceaseless weight of routine. Discipline is the glue that holds them together. Each morning the centurions walk the lines, vine staffs in hand, ensuring that no one shirks their duties. The men know the rules by heart. Tents must be struck, gear must be checked, shields polished until they gleam. Even in the fog, even at the end of the world, Rome insists on order. A soldier's pack still carries the same burdens as yesterday, more than 25 kilograms, roughly 55 pounds pressing into aching shoulders. Marching with that load day after day makes even the hardiest wish for a desk job back in Rome, if only such things had existed. Breakfast is meagre but vital. Crusts of bread, a little porridge, sometimes dried fruit if supply lines have not faltered. One quirky fact: soldiers often flavoured their gruel with vinegar mixed with water, called posca. It was tangy sour and supposedly refreshing, though one might politely say it was an acquired taste. Imagine trudging through bogs with vinegar breath that could explain why local tribes kept their distance. Historians still argue whether the legion's diet in Britannia made them weaker than their continental counterparts, or whether the harsh environment simply ground them down. Beyond meals and marching there is superstition. Soldiers carve small charms into wood or scratch prayers onto bits of lead. Some carry amulets against curses, others rely on crude jokes about the gods to lighten the mood. In one corner of camp, a group of men debates whether the mist itself is a sign of divine displeasure, perhaps Neptune reminding them that Britannia is an island he controls. Another shrugs and says the gods are probably just playing dice, and Rome is losing. The laugh that follows is tired but real. Life in the forts before this campaign was hardly luxurious, yet compared to the open march it was comfortable. Timber walls, watchtowers and tiled baths provided a sense of stability. Soldiers might gamble with dice-write letters home or grumble about centurions while oiling their gear. A mainstream historical detail, Roman forts in Britannia were built to a standard plan with straight streets, barracks in rows, and a headquarters in the centre. Order imposed on chaos the Roman way, but outside those walls chaos always lurked. Local tribes raided supply lines, ambushed patrols, and vanished back into forests the Romans struggled to tame. Now away from those walls, the legion feels exposed. Every shadow in the trees could hide an enemy, every distant shout could signal an ambush. Scouts report odd movements, fires glimpsed at night, paths trampled by many feet, strange carvings on tree trunks that no Roman can interpret. Are they warnings, prayers, or practical jokes from tribes who know the Romans are watching? No one agrees. The debates simmer by firelight, centurions dismissing fears, while younger soldiers whisper that the locals wield powers beyond Roman understanding. The days drag on with monotony punctuated by bursts of unease. March, halt, set, camp, cook, sleep, repeat. Rain makes mud of the road, soaking sandals until skin cracks and blisters form. A joke spreads through the ranks. Britannia's true enemy is not the tribes, but the weather a foe Rome cannot conquer. A soldier mutters that the empire should build an aqueduct just to carry the rain away. His tentmates laugh, though everyone privately wonders how long Rome will bother with such a land when the very sky seems hostile. Still, pride keeps them moving. To be a Roman legionary is to embody the empire's might. Standards glint through mist, trumpets blare the signals and formations hold. Even here on the edge of the world they march with the discipline that once crushed Carthage and toppled Greek kings. Yet discipline does not warm toes at night, and pride does not silence the ache of longing for home. Letters written to families if they ever reached the other side of the sea must have been filled with equal parts bravado and complaint. We stand strong against the tribes, one might write, while privately adding and curse this endless drizzle. As they push deeper, small skirmishes erupt. A lone arrow loosed from the trees, a sudden rush of figures before vanishing again. Losses are few, but tension grows. Each man knows the legion is vast, thousands of soldiers marching together, yet isolation gnaws at them. A quirky tidbit from some accounts suggests that soldiers sometimes nickname themselves after animals to feel braver. Imagine a weary soldier declaring himself the Wolf of Londinium while sneezing into his cloak. Humour thin though it may be is armour of its own. By night, fires burn low and the silence presses in. The men exchange stories, some about past battles, others about impossible dreams of retiring to vineyards in warmer climates. The wine will be sweeter, the sun brighter, the burdens lighter. Such dreams sustain them even as they sense the fog thickening as though the land itself conspires to erase their presence. And so life continues on the frontier, a relentless pattern of marching, eating and worrying painted against a backdrop of damp forests and shifting mist. The legion remains intact, its discipline unbroken, yet a shadow lingers. Each routine action feels fragile, as though something unseen watches and waits for the perfect moment to strike. The legion's steady rhythm falters as whispers begin to ripple through the ranks. At first it is only a few hushed remarks around the campfires, mentions of strange movements in the forests, rumours of tribes gathering in numbers larger than usual. Then scouts return with anxious faces reporting trails that vanish suddenly, villages that seem abandoned, and smoke from distant fires curling upward into the grey sky. The men tighten their grips on their shields and glance uneasily into the woods. Something is stirring beyond the edge of the Roman order. Rebellion is nothing new in Britannia. Only a few decades earlier, Boudicca's uprising had swept across the province, leaving charred ruins of Roman settlements in its wake. Veterans remember the stories told with grim pride, whole legions nearly annihilated, towns sacked, Rome nearly humiliated before order was restored. The empire had triumphed then, but only by the narrowest margin. Now the memory lingers like a scar. Soldiers mutter that perhaps the land itself rebels, not just its people. Historians still argue whether these uprisings were coordinated resistance or spontaneous eruptions of fury against Roman taxation and rule. To the legionaries, however, it makes little difference. Either way, it means danger. Marching through damp valleys and over ridges, the legion begins to notice unsettling signs. Trees marked with unfamiliar carvings, bones tied together in crude talismans, and cairns of stones left on paths as if to warn intruders away. To Roman eyes, they are barbaric decorations. To local tribes, they may hold spiritual power. A quirky tidbit, Roman commanders sometimes dismissed such signs as childish superstitions, yet many legionaries carried their own charms. The contradiction is almost comic, mocking the tribes for their tokens, while clutching a lucky coin from home. The officers determined to keep morale steady frame the rumours as exaggerations. Centurions bark that rebels are cowardly, unable to face Rome's steel in open battle. They remind the soldiers that their training, their discipline and their sheer numbers will prevail. Still, when another scout fails to return, the bravado feels thin. A soldier jokes nervously that perhaps the scout simply found a tavern and decided never to leave. Laughter follows, but it is laughter, with an edge the kind that dies quickly when the wind shifts. Daily life grows more tense. The men build camps with higher palisades, dig ditches deeper, and post double sentries at night. Fires are kept low to avoid drawing attention. Sleep becomes restless. Every snapping twig stirs fears of an ambush. Letters written by torchlight begin to sound more urgent, though few will survive to tell us the truth. Archaeologists have uncovered scraps of wax tablets and fragments of styluses from Roman sites in Britannia, silent witnesses to men who tried to write their anxieties into permanence. Meanwhile, local tribes gather in secrecy. Roman intelligence suggests that alliances are forming between groups that normally feud. Old rivalries are set aside in the face of a common enemy. The mist that cloaks the landscape serves them well, letting them move unseen while Rome stumbles. Historians debate whether these alliances truly existed, or whether Roman fear magnified scattered raids into the spectre of coordinated rebellion. The truth may never be known, but for the legion trudging northward, perception is as powerful as fact. In the evenings, the soldiers whisper of druids who can summon storms of warriors who paint themselves blue and vanish like ghosts. Some dismiss these tales as nonsense, others are less certain. One young legionary swears he heard chanting on the wind, though his tent mates insist it was only the moan of branches. Humour helps relieve the tension. If the Druids are so powerful, one man quips, why do they live in huts while Rome builds cities? The line earns a few weary chuckles, but the unease remains. Despite the fear, discipline holds. Orders come to press forward to demonstrate Rome's power to cow the tribes into submission. Retreat is unthinkable. Hesitation dishonours the eagle standard, yet the deeper they march, the more invisible their enemy seems. Ambushes flash like lightning arrows from nowhere, a rush of figures, then silence again. Losses are small, but the psychological toll is heavy. The soldiers are fighting shadows, and shadows cannot be pinned down. A mainstream historical detail underscores this reality. The Roman army was built for set-piece battles, for meeting enemies head-on in disciplined formations. Guerrilla warfare in forests and marshes undermined those strengths. Spears and shields meant for open fields became clumsy in tangled undergrowth. Formations broke down when visibility dropped to only a few paces. Rome could build straight roads across mountains, but it could not straighten a forest. The legion's commanders remain outwardly confident, but privately they must have wondered whether they faced more than simple raids. Supplies run thinner. Messages to nearby forts go unanswered, either because they never arrived or because messengers never returned. At one camp, a soldier finds strange symbols etched into the earth outside the palisade. No one knows what they mean. Are they warnings, mockery, or perhaps invitations to step deeper into the trap? And still, the fog thickens. It presses against the camp walls at night, muffling sound, swallowing the light of torches. The men huddle closer, voices low, the laughter more forced. Each day begins with the same ritual pack, the gear march forward. Try to ignore the feeling that invisible eyes follow every step. The whispers of rebellion grow louder, not because proof multiplies, but because fear magnifies every uncertainty. A missing patrol becomes evidence of ambush. A distant fire means an army gathers. A broken branch suggests spies in the woods. The legion pushes on discipline against dread, but the line between order and collapse begins to blur, and somewhere in the shadows the tribes wait. Whether united or scattered, they know the land in a way Rome never will. They melt into the mist as easily as smoke, leaving the legion to march deeper into uncertainty, the whispers of rebellion swelling like a tide. The paper trail thins as the fog thickens. Somewhere between the last fort on the frontier and the low ridges beyond a governor's dispatch, notes the legion's direction, an expected timetable, then the ink simply stops. The clerk who writes it sits at a small desk, shivering a little, drawing careful letters with a reed pen. He scratches down place names, mile counts the names of centurions in charge of supply wagons, and the number of mules assigned to haul grain. He does not know he is composing the last clear line anyone will ever read about these men. The words stand like stones across a river, and then there is only water. Official paperwork in Britannia is brisk and fussy. Couriers ride out with tablets sealed in wax, the messages impressed by styluses and protected by twine against prying eyes. When the wax cools, a signet ring confirms authority. The paperwork lists distances between way stations, often 10 to 15 kilometres, about 6 to 9 miles, and estimates marching times that look tidy on a desk, but turn tricky when rain turns paths to porridge. Visibility on bad days drops below 50 metres, roughly 164 feet, which is less than the length of a standard Roman battle line. The bureaucrats do their sums anyway. Numbers soothe, even when clouds refuse to. A mainstream historical fact anchors the scene along this frontier. Letters like the famous wooden tablets from Vindolanda preserve everyday details of Roman life, requests for more socks, invitations to birthday parties, gripes about shortages. The empire's memory often survives as small voices, not grand decrees. Here too the evidence hints at the routine, a requisition for grain, a complaint about mouldy rations, a note that one cohort will detach to scout a river crossing. None of these says this is the end, yet all press toward it. The governor's final confirmed report mentions the legion's eagle standard and the order of march cavalry screening ahead, engineers carrying tools, baggage animals tugging along with a patience that would shame philosophers. He notes, weather inclement, which is Roman for bring a second cloak. He adds that local guides have been procured from a nearby village, and that a timber bridge recently damaged may slow progress by half a day. The tone is calm. It is the calm of someone who believes the system will hold because it always has. In Rome, things fail slowly. On the frontier, they fail all at once. Along the route, milestones lean to one side like tired sentries, their neat numerals softened by moss. Scouts pace out the ground, counting steps, checking stream depths with poles marked in handspans. One soldier jokes that the pole should be graded in Britannia units, ankle deep, knee deep, and say goodbye to your boots. Laughter follows the kind that helps a man forget that cold water can steal heat faster than fear can bring it back. Even jokes obey the chain of command, make them quick, make them quiet, and never when the centurion's eyebrow lifts. The last witnesses are not Romans at all. A shepherd later tells a trader who tells a clerk who writes that he saw the long dark snake of soldiers slide along a ridge at dawn, then dip into a shallow valley where mist pooled like milk. He heard no battle, only the distant thud of marching and the bleat of a lost sheep. When the sun finally burned a small hole in the cloud, the ridge stood empty. The shepherd swears he saw the standard's glint vanish as if swallowed. The clerk underlines that word swallowed, and then, being a responsible Roman, crosses it out and replaces it with obscured. Bureaucracy prefers digestible verbs. Quirky rumours multiply where facts end. One tale insists the quartermaster sent a plea for drier firewood written with purple ink, the shade reserved for imperial matters, because he argued this much damp is practically treason. Another claims a cook packed a clay jar of garum so potent that the men marched faster to escape its smell, which to be fair might count as tactical innovation. The truth, of course, is less theatrical. Damp wood smokes rations sour, and an army moves as fast as its slowest cart. But fringe tidbits cling to a mystery like burrs to a cloak. Historians still argue whether the governor's office intentionally softened the reports once rumours of heavy losses stirred. Political storms can be more dangerous than northern gales. A commander who missteps in a bog risks drowning. A commander who missteps in Rome risks denunciation. It would not be the first time that an official preferred ambiguous phrasing over alarming truth, especially if truth required expensive reinforcements. One school of thought reads the silence as shame. Another reads it as simple breakdown couriers, lost roads, washed-out messages stranded on the wrong side of a swollen river. The debate circles like ravens above an empty field. If you walk the ground today, boots on peat drizzle in your eyebrows, you can still feel how a legion might lose itself. Hill and hollow repeat in a pattern that confuses compass and memory alike. Streams split and rejoin their braids, glittering like dropped chains when the sun decides to show kindness. Distances stretch subjectively. 5 kilometres, roughly 3 miles, feels like 10 kilometres, about 6 miles, when a pack digs into your shoulders and your cloak drinks the weather like a sponge. The land does not care about Roman schedules. The land keeps its own time. Near a bend in the river, the engineers pause to consider the damaged bridge. The water runs higher than expected, earlier rains upstream perhaps, and brown eddies bump the timbers with a patient, almost conversational knock. One centurion proposes a ford upstream where the current looks smoother. Another insists the bridge can be repaired by noon. The standard bearer watches the eagle's reflection shiver on the surface and says nothing. Choices made at noon become legends by nightfall. The courier departs with a routine update, progress slower than projected supplies, sufficient for 8 days, about 1 week plus a day, and locals sullen but quiet. He promises to send word again after the next camp is set. He disappears into the tree's hooves, muffled cloak snapping once as he turns along a hedge line. No reply to that message is ever recorded. Perhaps he arrived and his return was delayed. Perhaps he did not. The archive offers only an empty space shaped like a paragraph that was never written. Here the narrative reaches its narrowest channel, the last confirmed sighting, the last stamped tablet, the last bureaucratic sentence with a period at the end. Beyond it, the record loosens into adjectives likely supposed believed, and the fog that wet their hair drenches the future's memory too. Rome, which measures files and stores, fails to capture the very thing it most values, the line from cause to effect. And because the line snaps here, theories will bloom later like mushrooms after rain. For now, though, nothing blooms but silence. Camp goes up that evening on a slight rise above a marsh. The engineers, efficient as ever, cut drainage ditches that gurgle like sleepy mouths. Tents form in perfect rows. Fires guarded and low hiss as wet wood gives up its stubbornness. Someone announces that the ration wine tastes better if you think about Italy very hard. Someone else says the trick works even better if you close your eyes. A third declares that thinking and closing your eyes are both excellent strategies for avoiding work and is promptly told to fetch more water. The laughter floats thin and human in the damp. On a small table in the headquarters tent, The clerk smooths wax across a tablet to prepare for tomorrow's neat lines. He stacks styluses, tests the point of the reed pen, and places the governor's seal within easy reach. He does not know he is arranging the tools for a report that will never be written. Outside, the mist draws close again, tender as a shawl, and just as smothering. Somewhere in the dark, a heron lifts and beats the air slowly, its wings whispering over the marsh, as if shooing the world to sleep. The last confirmed sighting settles into the quiet, and the night waits unblinking. The story fractures here like a mosaic with missing tiles. With the trail of official paperwork gone, we are left with guesses, theories, and the fertile imagination of both ancient rumour and modern scholarship. The fog that closed over the Legion is the same fog that cloaks our understanding. From this moment forward, every explanation is a balancing act between evidence and speculation, between what might have happened and what we prefer to believe. The most traditional theory is simple: the Legion was ambushed. Britannia's tribes, knowing the terrain and driven by a long memory of resentment, could have struck with precision. Guerrilla tactics, swift charges from the trees, showers of arrows, sudden retreats into marshes could whittle down even Rome's most disciplined formation. Historians point to the Battle of Teutoburg Forest decades earlier, when 3 legions under Varus were annihilated in Germanic woods. If it happened there, why not here? Yet the silence of the record gnaws at the idea. After Teutoburg, Rome erupted in mourning and rage. Here there is almost nothing. Why would an empire that shouted so loudly about its defeats whisper this when others proposed desertion or mutiny? An entire legion weary of endless reign, far from home, perhaps underpaid and underfed, could have turned its back on discipline. The idea sounds outrageous. Roman soldiers swore sacred oaths and punishments for desertion were brutal, but desperation twists even iron bonds. A quirky tidbit: Roman legions occasionally staged collective protests by refusing to fight until better pay was promised. It is not impossible that in Britannia's wilderness the soldiers chose a darker form of protest, disappearing altogether. Historians still argue whether the empire would have buried such an embarrassment in silence, or crushed the truth beneath the weight of edited records. Then there is the possibility of reassignment. Some scholars suggest the legion was quietly redeployed elsewhere, perhaps to guard another frontier, perhaps to join campaigns on the continent. If so, the disappearance is not a mystery, but a clerical error magnified by time. Yet this explanation feels oddly unsatisfying, like claiming a ghost story is only a creaky floorboard. The lack of new inscriptions, the absence of clear reappearance under another name, leaves the idea hanging unconvincing. The fog resists neat solutions. More dramatic suggestions push into the realm of legend. One theory insists that the legion marched straight into a bog and never emerged, swallowed whole by the land itself. Imagine thousands of sandals sinking into mud shields, tilting standards, falling the marsh, closing overhead like a patient predator. Another fringe speculation claims they were lured into caves or hidden valleys, where they were trapped, their bones lost forever to damp stone. And still others, leaning toward the poetic, speak of the legion merging with the mist itself, cursed to march endlessly through Britannia's forests, visible only to those who stray too far from safe paths. Every generation adds its own layer. Medieval chroniclers, fond of moral lessons, painted the Lost Legion as a punishment for Roman arrogance. They claimed druids summoned enchantments to blind the invaders, leading them to wander until hunger and despair consumed them. In the 19th century, writers with a taste for the Gothic spun tales of soldiers' ghosts glimpsed on foggy ridges, shields glimmering like moonlight. And in the 20th century, archaeologists tried to scrape away myth with spades, uncovering coins, pottery and fragments of weapons, but never enough to write a conclusion. The lack of finality keeps the theories alive. A mainstream historical fact underscores the mystery. Roman legions were meticulous record keepers, inscribing their victories on monuments, their names on fort stones, their movements in orderly reports. For one to vanish without a trace contradicts the empire's obsession with permanence. That absence is itself evidence, though, of what no one can agree. Historians still argue whether silence means disaster, deception, or something stranger altogether. Around campfires, soldiers themselves might have whispered theories not unlike ours. Perhaps the tribes want us to chase them only to cut us off in the woods. Perhaps the governor sold us out to save his own skin. Perhaps the gods themselves are offended by our march into their sacred groves. The jokes thin out as the possibilities grow darker. One soldier might quip, if Mars wanted us safe, he would have built a roof over Britannia. Another mutters, If Mars wanted us safe, he would have sent us to Sicily. Humour clings like a damp cloak, barely keeping out the chill. Meanwhile, modern reimaginings keep piling up. Some novelists depict the Legion as defectors who fled south and blended with local tribes, their descendants hidden in remote valleys. Others imagine them stumbling onto lands far beyond known maps, perhaps even reaching coasts no Roman ever charted. A quirky modern theory even suggests survivors made it back to Rome but were deliberately erased from history for some political scandal. The Empire loved glory but was ruthless at pruning shame from its archives. Yet the simplest explanation still tugs hardest. The Legion marched into hostile territory and never marched back. The landscape itself conspires to erase certainty. Mist smears, horizons, rain, blurs, tracks, bogs drink evidence, and centuries grind away what little remains. Without inscriptions, without graves, without artifacts in clear context, we are left with mist on the page as surely as mist on the hills. And so Section 5 is not a conclusion, but an opening. A forest of theories, each one tall and twisting, each one blocking the next. You can wander among them forever and never find the end. The Legion's path fades, and the reader's mind steps in to fill the void. That is the power of mystery, not to answer, but to keep asking. And tonight, as you imagine the Legion's last footsteps sinking into wet earth, you may find yourself listening for echoes that will never quite arrive. Rome prided itself on record-keeping, on inscribing victories in stone, and filing defeats in scrolls that could be explained away. Yet when it came to the vanished Legion, silence settled like dust on a forgotten shelf. Reports taper off, correspondence grows vague, and official histories glide past the subject with the grace of a senator avoiding a difficult question. The empire that carved its achievements on arches and columns suddenly has nothing to say. That silence is almost louder than any tale of battle could have been. In Rome itself, the Senate debates other matters. Grain shipments from Africa, unrest in the east, the succession of emperors who seem to appear and vanish like mayflies in summer. Britannia is a distant province, damp and troublesome, not worth more than a few lines in official records unless something grand occurs. A mainstream historical fact underlines this point. Even when emperors visited Britannia, the chroniclers often devoted more space to their journeys through Gaul than to their time across the Channel. Rome's heart beat closer to the Mediterranean. Britannia was always an outstretched arm, sometimes numb with distance. Still whispers reach the capital. Merchants speak of a legion that marched into the mist and did not return. Traders exaggerate thousands slaughtered or worse spirited away by druids. Senators listen, frown, and change the subject. No one wants to admit a loss that cannot be explained. Historians still argue whether the silence reflects shame, deliberate suppression, or simple bureaucratic collapse. To admit that Rome lost an entire legion would be to admit that the empire's grip was not absolute, that even the mightiest army could vanish into mud. That is not the sort of story emperors like to tell. Within the provinces, the absence becomes harder to ignore. Fort commanders note that reinforcements never arrive, that supply chains suddenly terminate in blank space. Pay records show deductions for men who no longer exist. One quirky tidbit. Roman accounting was so meticulous that wages for dead soldiers sometimes continued to be listed, until someone officially struck the names off the rolls. Imagine a pay clerk scratching out 45 denarii for Marcus, long after Marcus had ceased to draw breath. Paperwork has its own inertia, and in this case it helps create the illusion that the legion still lingered. The local population notices too. Villages that once saw lines of armoured men now hear only birdsong. Some breathe easier, glad that taxes and requisitions will not come knocking. Others worry, for Rome's absence leaves them vulnerable to rival tribes. The governor must respond, but his response is cautious. He sends out smaller patrols, then larger ones, then finally reinforcements from another garrison. None finds the missing men. Reports are filed stamped and tucked into archives where they gather dust rather than clarity. Centuries later, archaeologists would comb those archives, hoping for some overlooked note, some stray reference to the legion's fate. They find fragments instead, half sentences about supplies, remarks on local unrest, cryptic mentions of reassignments. Nothing that nails the coffin shut. The silence feels deliberate, as if the Empire had agreed to forget. Perhaps the legion's loss was seen as too embarrassing to memorialise. After all, the Romans were masters of spin. They celebrated victories loudly and disguised defeats with euphemisms. A strategic withdrawal sounds nobler than we were ambushed in a swamp. In barracks across the Empire, soldiers gossip about the disappearance. Tales grow taller with each retelling. One version says the Legion was sacrificed by its own commanders to appease angry gods. Another insists the men were spirited away to build secret fortresses deep underground. The jokes persist as well. If you cannot find them, one soldier says try looking in the tavern. Another mutters, maybe they all melted in Britannia's reign. Gallows humour the soldier's eternal refuge. Meanwhile, the official histories glide past. Tacitus, usually so meticulous about the Empire's military affairs, is either unaware or unwilling to dwell on this particular loss. Other writers mention Britannia only in passing, and when they do, the missing legion is conspicuously absent. Historians still argue whether this is coincidence or conspiracy. Did the chroniclers genuinely know nothing, or were they encouraged to forget Rome could be ruthless with memory-chiselling names from monuments, erasing disgraced figures from statues? If an emperor ordered silence, silence is what history received. The effect is eerie. Rome speaks loudly of almost everything, battles, taxes, marriages, even plumbing. But here the pages are blank. For those who love mystery, the silence is a gift, a canvas onto which endless theories can be painted. For the soldiers themselves, though, it was likely nothing more glamorous than being lost, ambushed, or betrayed. Yet Rome's decision not to tell us ensures the mystery remains suspended like a shadow between fact and fiction. It is worth remembering that empires curate their legacies as carefully as a sculptor chips at marble. They reveal what flatters them, conceal what does not, and reshape events until they fit the narrative of eternal strength. The missing legion did not fit, and so the empire hushed its voice, leaving only the sound of distant marching in the imagination. And in that hush lies power. Had Rome documented the disaster, we might now read it as just another bloody skirmish. Because Rome chose silence, the lost legion lingers its absence as tangible as presence. Silence in its way is a monument too. The centuries roll forward, and with them the land swallows memory. Where once thousands of boots pressed down trails, moss spreads, rivers change course, and villages rise and fall. For long stretches of time, the missing legion exists only in rumour and silence. Then archaeology begins to stir the embers, digging with careful hands, unearthing clues that are fragments at best and riddles at worst. The spade does not recover certainty, but it does give us echoes, each one faint yet suggestive like voices carried on fog. Coins are among the first to appear. Roman currency scattered across Britannia lies buried in fields, sometimes washed to the surface by ploughs. At first glance, these seem ordinary bronze asses, silver denarii stamped with imperial profiles, reminders of salaries paid and tavern bills settled. Yet clusters of coins in odd places raise questions. Why here in an isolated valley? Why so many in a marsh where no permanent settlement stood? A mainstream historical fact highlights the mystery. Soldiers often buried their pay during campaigns intending to retrieve it later. When the owner never returned, the ground kept the secret. Each hoard could be a soldier's unfinished sentence. Altars and inscriptions provide another thread. Archaeologists uncover stone fragments dedicated to Jupiter, Mars, and local deities carved by soldiers whose names endure only because they wished to please the gods. One fragment might read, "To the spirits of the place, Marcus offers thanks for safe return." Another simply, "Fortune guide us." The irony stings. Safe return never came, and Fortune's guidance seems questionable at best. Some altars lie broken as if toppled in haste or smashed by later hands. Were they destroyed in battle or by time's slow hammer? Historians still argue whether these ruins mark the legion's path or merely the presence of other units. Artifacts blur the line further. A shard of pottery stamped with a legion's mark surfaces far from any recorded garrison. A helmet cheek piece gleams after centuries underground, its bronze still stubborn against decay. Broken spearheads, worn sandals, bits of chainmail all tell stories of soldiers present, but do not confirm their fate. One quirky tidbit. Roman sandals called caligae sometimes carried hobnails in patterns that left distinct prints. Archaeologists who find clusters of these nails in soil know soldiers once stood there. Yet finding nails in the mud of Britannia is a little like finding raindrops in a storm. Then there are the stranger finds. A set of small wooden writing tablets discovered near a river shows faint scratches of Latin script. One fragment mentions a delivery to the cohort stationed by the northern hills. Was this our missing legion, or another unit entirely? The words fade before the name can be confirmed. Another site yields animal bones mixed with pottery shards, suggesting a feast interrupted. Did an ambush strike mid-meal, or did later settlers reuse the camp and leave their leftovers in the ditch? The evidence whispers, but never sings. Archaeology is not without its humour. Imagine a modern scholar caked in mud brushing at what he hopes is a Roman artefact, only to uncover a rusty horseshoe from the 18th century. Or picture the sigh when a promising mound proves to be nothing more than a farmer's long-forgotten compost heap. Yet persistence pays. Every coin, every shard, every nail hammered into a sandal strap is a thread. When woven together, they form not a complete tapestry, but at least a patchwork. The debates grow fiercer with each discovery. Some scholars argue that the scatter of artifacts proves the legions splintered defeated in skirmishes, leaving bits of themselves across the land like breadcrumbs. Others claim the artifacts belong to other units entirely, and that attaching them to the Lost Legion is wishful thinking. Historians still argue whether archaeology can ever answer questions that written history refused to. The fog that erased the Legion seems to cling to the evidence itself, making every conclusion provisional. Local folklore sometimes supports the digs. Farmers tell of fields where ploughs strike metal too often, or where old stories say the Romans fell. Children playing on ridges stumble over coins and carry them home as lucky charms. A quirky local belief once held that such coins could ward off toothaches if placed beneath a pillow. Rome's pay, centuries late, still buying relief in curious ways. Despite centuries of searching, no mass grave has been found, no final battlefield revealed. The absence becomes its own presence. In history, a missing body is often louder than a corpse. Archaeologists pace the fields, measure soil, and squint at maps chasing phantoms that always seem one trench further on. And in the evenings after the day's work, they gather in pubs to argue whether today's nail was a clue or just another bit of scrap. One imagines Roman soldiers laughing in the dark, amused that their fate still teases minds so far in the future. A mainstream historical fact deepens the irony Roman legions usually left behind permanent traces, fortresses, roads, inscriptions, so much so that archaeologists often map their campaigns with near mathematical precision. That this legion left no such permanent mark is baffling. Did the fog of war quite literally erase them, or did later generations of Romans deliberately remove evidence as if erasing chalk from a board? The absence feels almost intentional, like a hand brushing away footprints, and so the echoes pile up, coins that glint like lost wages, altars that beg for protection never granted, weapons, broken sandals, scattered pots, cracked and discarded. Each one is a voice, but together they produce only a murmur. The legion's fate does not rise from the soil. It remains underground, cloaked in damp earth and thicker mysteries. As night falls over an archaeological dig, torches flicker against canvas tents, and the air smells of rain on clay. Scholars huddle over trays of cleaned finds, arguing gently, sometimes heatedly, always circling the same gap at the centre. No artefact has yet filled it. The legion still wanders in the fog of unknowing, and the spade for all its power cannot clear the mist. Centuries pass, and where Roman voices fall silent, medieval ones rise eager to fill the gap. Monks in scriptoria, their quills scratching across vellum by candlelight, stumble upon fragments of Rome's past and feel compelled to explain them. They live in a world where mystery is not only expected but welcomed, where miracles and curses form part of daily conversation. For them, the vanished legion is not a problem of logistics, but a parable waiting to be told. And so legends take over, layering faith and imagination atop the bones of history. The earliest scribes described the legion's disappearance as divine judgment. Rome, after all, had once persecuted Christians. What better fate for an arrogant army than to be swallowed by fog as punishment from heaven? Some chroniclers claim that the soldiers' final cries were heard in the wind for years afterward, a chorus of lament echoing through valleys. Others write that their armour turned to stone, leaving silent figures frozen on ridges. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval writers often recast Roman history in moral terms, using it as a canvas for lessons. The Lost Legion became a warning pride leads to downfall, and empires that challenge God's order will find themselves erased. Yet not all tales paint divine punishment. Some legends shift the blame to druids who in medieval imagination gained powers grander than even they claimed in their own time. These druids, so the stories go, summoned mists thick as walls, and led the legion astray into enchanted forests. Once inside, the soldiers marched in circles until exhaustion claimed them, their footsteps muffled by moss. Historians still argue whether these tales preserve fragments of genuine tribal lore or are simply inventions of monks eager for drama. Either way, the image of ghostly legions wandering endlessly is too powerful to fade. Quirky twists appear in local folklore. In one tale, a farmer claims to have heard marching beneath the ground on quiet nights, as if the legion still tramped in subterranean corridors. Another story insists that on certain mornings, when the mist lies low, the glint of shields can be seen on distant hills before vanishing in the sunlight. Villagers tell their children not to wander too far, lest the lost legion mistake them for recruits and drag them into eternal service. These tales blend fear with fascination, ensuring the legion remains part of the landscape's living memory. Poets of the Middle Ages take liberties too. They cast the legion as tragic heroes, men who fought valiantly against overwhelming odds before falling into silence. Their verses swell with imagery, swords clashing against unseen enemies, banners drooping in rain helmets glimmering like stars in fog. For audiences accustomed to chansons of knights and saints, the Roman legion becomes just another band of noble figures whose end teaches courage and humility. The historical details blur, but the emotional resonance deepens. The legends also become tools of politics. A medieval lord seeking to bolster his land's mystique might claim that his ancestors fought alongside or against the ghostly legion. Monasteries eager for pilgrims tell visitors that relics in their possession belong to the vanished soldiers, shields, swords, or scraps of cloth preserved by miracle. One abbey even claims to have the eagle standard itself, though suspiciously it resembles a weather vane more than a Roman artifact. Pilgrims believe anyway, dropping coins into donation boxes. Faith is as much about story as about fact. Meanwhile, common folk weave the mystery into their seasonal rituals. Bonfires are lit on misty nights said to keep the wandering legion at bay. Shepherds mark crosses on gates to prevent ghostly soldiers from stealing sheep. Children play games where they march in circles until dizzy, pretending to vanish like Romans in the fog. These quirky traditions survive long after their origins are forgotten, echoing the legion's absence in laughter as much as in fear. The Renaissance revives interest in classical antiquity, and with it the story of the lost legion gains new flourishes. Scholars hunting for manuscripts stumble upon half-remembered references and embroider them with imagination. Some propose that the soldiers marched so far into the north that they reached lands of perpetual winter where snow swallowed them whole. Others speculate that they intermarried with tribes and became the ancestors of mysterious northern clans. Historians still argue whether such claims reflect genuine curiosity or simply the Renaissance love of grand theories. Either way, the story refuses to settle. In art, painters occasionally attempt to capture the mystery. A 15th century miniature shows a line of soldiers fading into mist, their faces serene, their shields gleaming faintly. The caption declares them martyrs, though no saintly halos crown their heads. Another illustration shows druids raising arms against armoured men, smoke swirling, suggesting magic triumphing over steel. These images, though far from accurate, keep the legend vivid. Viewers do not demand fact, they crave wonder. By the time printing spreads across Europe, the legion is firmly entrenched in popular imagination. Pamphlets retell the tale, with sensational flourishes, mists that whisper, curses, forests that move rivers, that open to swallow men whole. Readers thrill to the horror, and the legion becomes less a Roman unit than a metaphor for human fragility. In a world still wrestling with plagues and wars, the idea that even Rome could vanish into uncertainty feels oddly comforting. If the mighty can fall, then perhaps ordinary suffering is not meaningless. Thus, through centuries of retelling, the Lost Legion transforms. What began as a gap in records becomes a stage for myth-making. The soldiers, once men, trudging with sore feet and vinegar-flavoured drinks, become ghosts, martyrs, villains, and warnings. Their absence feeds imagination, which in turn keeps them alive in ways their real bones long dissolved into soil never could. As night deepens and the medieval scribes lay down their quills, their candles guttering low, one imagines the soft shuffle of unseen feet outside their cloisters. The scribes may smile knowingly, comforted by the thought that mystery itself is a kind of presence. And in that presence the legion marches still not through Britannia's forests, but through the dreams of every generation that cannot resist filling silence with story. The modern age arrives with maps sharper than any Roman could have imagined, compasses that refuse to be fooled by fog, and shovels ready to pry truth from stubborn soil. Yet even with satellites tracing the contours of Britannia, the legion's fate remains elusive. Modern reinvestigations pick up where ancient silence left off, filling the void. with expeditions, theories, and the stubborn belief that the past can still be coaxed to speak. 19th century antiquarians lead the first charge. They tramp across moors in heavy boots, sketching ruins in leather-bound notebooks, convinced they will stumble upon the legion's bones in neat rows. They dig trenches with more enthusiasm than method, turning up coins, pottery, and the occasional rusted blade. One eccentric insists that a cluster of hobnails he finds in a ditch proves the exact spot of the final battle. Another claims that the legion never vanished at all but sailed off to colonise distant islands. A quirky tidbit, one Victorian gentleman even argued that the legion survivors became ancestors of certain Scottish clans, explaining red hair as a Roman legacy. Historians still argue whether such theories represent creativity or wishful thinking dressed in tweed. By the 20th century, archaeology grows more disciplined. Excavations near Hadrian's Wall, Vindolanda and scattered northern sites uncover wooden tablets, military documents and personal letters that offer glimpses of soldierly life. They describe cold fingers, shortages of socks and requests for more beer. A mainstream historical fact emerges here. Roman soldiers in Britannia consumed significant quantities of beer, far more than their Mediterranean counterparts who preferred wine. This shift reflects adaptation to local supplies. Whether beer made the endless damp more bearable or simply blurred memory is left unrecorded. None of these finds, however, provides the smoking shield that proves the vanished legion's end. Amateur sleuths join the hunt with vigour. Hikers stumble across earthworks and declare them lost forts. Metal detector hobbyists find coins and trumpet them as relics of the missing men. Newspapers lap it up, running headlines like "Legion found at last," only to print corrections weeks later. Still, every discovery, however small, feeds the public imagination. The mystery becomes a national pastime, especially in Britain, where vanished Romans compete with Arthurian knights for folklore supremacy. Modern adventurers add flair. Television crews march in muddy fields, presenters gesturing dramatically to hillsides while declaring, "Here perhaps the Legion met its fate." Documentaries splice together drone footage interviews and moody reenactments. One host splashes into a bog explaining how soldiers might have sunk, while cameramen try not to laugh at his soggy boots. A quirky modern rumour even suggests the Legion wandered so far they crossed the sea and vanished into Caledonia, the land the Romans never conquered. If true, their silence might not be defeat, but simple escape into freedom. Academics, meanwhile, publish cautious papers bristling with footnotes. They weigh distribution patterns of artifacts, examine soil chemistry for traces of campfires, and debate whether certain inscriptions refer obliquely to our missing soldiers. Some argue that the Legion was transferred quietly to the continent and fought elsewhere, perhaps in the east. Others reject this, noting the absence of inscriptions or tombstones under the Legion's name beyond Britannia. Historians still argue whether we should read silence as evidence of annihilation or of bureaucratic sleight of hand. Technology steps in with new tools. Ground-penetrating radar scans beneath fields revealing ditches and palisade lines hidden from the eye. LiDAR mapping strips away vegetation to uncover patterns of ancient roads and camps. Yet none of these revelations shows a battlefield littered with Roman gear. They reveal forts, yes, and settlements, yes, but the Legion itself remains absent, its ghost slipping between data points. Even in the age of satellites, the fog lingers. Public fascination keeps the search alive. Reenactment groups dress in lorica segmentata shields on arms and march across hillsides tracing the possible routes of the vanished. Spectators cheer, children gawk, and for a moment the Legion exists again in flesh and leather. Yet when the costumes are packed away, the mystery remains. Museums curate exhibitions on the Lost Legion displaying coins, helmets and inscriptions under moody lighting. Visitors lean close to glass cases whispering about the men who carried these objects, and wondering why no one knows where they went. Theories proliferate online. Forums fill with debates, some scholarly, some wildly imaginative. One user posts satellite images claiming to see the outline of a Roman camp in farmland. Another insists that genetic testing proves Roman blood flows in local villages. A third suggests aliens spirited the Legion away because no great mystery is complete without extraterrestrial cameos. A quirky internet meme even shows a legionary holding a pint of ale with the caption, "Still waiting for orders." The humour keeps the legend alive in unexpected corners of modern culture. Through it all, the question endures. How could thousands of disciplined soldiers, men trained to leave traces in every ditch and milestone, vanish so thoroughly? The persistence of the question says as much about us as about them. We crave closure. We hunger for neat endings, yet history often refuses to oblige. The fog that hid them in life hides them still, mocking our maps, our satellites, and our scholarship. A mainstream fact to remember history's greatest allure is not always in what we know, but in what remains uncertain. The Legion's disappearance resists tidy explanations, and in resisting it gains immortality. Each shovel that strikes soil, each map unfurled on a desk, each hiker staring across a misty valley adds another layer to the story. We do not know where they went, and perhaps we never will, but the search itself keeps them marching in our minds step after step, century after century. As twilight falls over another modern dig, archaeologists pack away their tools. The ground yields no final word, only hints and whispers. A cold wind stirs the grass, carrying with it the faint impression of distant footsteps. For those who listen closely, it almost sounds like marching, steady, disciplined, unbroken. The Legion still walks, if not in flesh, then in memory, retraced by every generation, unwilling to let the fog have the last word. Time folds over itself, and the vanished Legion becomes less a set of men in sandals and more a mirror in which we see our own need for mystery. The fog that once curled over Britannia's forests has seeped into history itself, turning absence into legend. Theories clash, artifacts whisper, legends sing, yet the truth refuses to step forward. And perhaps that is why the story endures. The Legion never really leaves us, because it never truly returns. In classrooms, professors gesture toward maps and say, "Here is where they were last seen." Students scribble notes, some fascinated, some distracted, all touching. For a moment, the chill of the unknown. Historians still argue whether the men died in a swamp merged with local tribes or were transferred quietly elsewhere. None of these explanations satisfies entirely. Each feels like a garment that does not quite fit, either too loose or too tight, leaving the mystery still shivering in the cold. Writers and filmmakers continue the march in imagination. Novels describe soldiers waking each morning in an endless forest, condemned to wander like spirits. Films show standards glinting briefly before vanishing into mist, leaving viewers unsettled. Even video games place ghostly legionaries as enemies or allies, their armour clanking faintly in digital fog. A quirky tidbit, one board game designed in the 21st century uses the Lost Legion as a plot twist, having them appear suddenly on the map as if history had only misplaced them for a while. Our fascination is not merely academic, it is creative, feeding art as much as it feeds scholarship. The physical landscape still plays its part. Walk the ridges of northern Britain on a damp morning and you can almost believe the soldiers are just out of sight. Mist clings to the hills, sheep graze silently, and streams gurgle with patient voices. A mainstream historical fact is that many Roman roads still exist beneath modern paths, their stones pressed down by centuries of footsteps. To follow them is to trace the same lines those men once traced, though they ended where we cannot. The road remains, the travellers are gone. Tourists arrive with guidebooks, eager to stand where the mystery deepens. Some take photographs of fields where nothing obvious marks the past, content to say, "Here may be." Local pubs sell ales with names like the Vanished Legion or Fog of Rome, blending history with hospitality. Children listen wide-eyed to stories told by tour guides who lean into the drama, voices dropping as they describe the moment the Legion melted into air. Memory becomes part of the economy, and the mystery pays its own wages. For scholars, the silence continues to rankle. Each new dig, each new technology promises a breakthrough. Ground-penetrating radar scans, fields, drones, survey ridges, and DNA analysis combs burial grounds for hints of Mediterranean origins. Yet nothing definitive surfaces. The Legion's fate slips away each time like mist through fingers. Historians still argue whether we should stop searching or keep going. Some insist the answer lies buried, still waiting patiently. Others argue the mystery itself is the treasure best left unsolved, so imagination may thrive. In the end, the Legion belongs as much to dream as to fact. Soldiers who once cursed damp cloaks and long marches are now immortals of uncertainty, forever halfway between history and myth. They teach us that even the mightiest empire cannot control every line of its story. Rome wanted to inscribe eternity, but here eternity refuses inscription. The blank space is as permanent as marble, and so as you close your eyes tonight, picture them once more, thousands of figures marching steadily into fog armour gleaming faintly standards high. Step after step their rhythm fades until only silence remains. Yet in that silence, your imagination begins to supply the rest footsteps on damp earth. The creak of leather straps, the faint murmur of voices carried by wind. The Legion is gone, and yet it is here because you remember it now. Legion no longer needs to hurry, and neither do you. Imagine the mist thinning, no longer a curtain of fear, but a gentle veil settling across quiet fields. Trees stand still, their branches swaying slowly as if nodding in drowsy approval. Streams murmur not with urgency, but with the steady lull of a lullaby. The soldiers, once tense and burdened, now lay down their shields and stretch weary legs finally at rest. Breathe deeply as if the damp air of Britannia drifts through your own window. With each inhale, tension eases. With each exhale, the weight of questions releases. The mystery remains yes, but it no longer feels sharp. It is softened by time, blurred into calmness. Just as the fog hides harsh edges of rock and root, your mind lets go of sharp worries, smoothing them into gentle shapes that no longer catch. Picture the Legion's camp one last time, but quieter now. No orders shouted, no armour clanking, only the faint crackle of a small fire that resists the mist. Around it men rest with closed eyes, breathing in unison, their bodies finally safe. You two can share in that rest, letting the long march of your own day come to its end. The path behind is long, the destination uncertain, but here and now stillness is enough. Let the story drift backward into silence. Let the Legion vanish once more, not with fear but with peace. And as their footsteps fade entirely, let sleep take their place. Deep, unhurried, gentle sleep. The kind that restores as surely as dawn restores light to the world. Until next time, sweet dreams.